5-hour security lines snaking through terminal concourses, and a $200 billion supplemental request for Operation Epic Fury sitting in limbo. Right in the middle, 260,000 federal employees are entering another week without a paycheck.
It's the kind of legislative gridlock that feels like a physical weight, especially for anyone trying to get through JFK or O'Hare right now. The transcript from yesterday, Wednesday, reflects a Capitol that is essentially operating as a high-stakes pawn shop.
Everything is a trade, but it seems nobody is buying yet. We're 40 days into this Department of Homeland Security shutdown, and the record shows the pressure is finally bubbling over into the floor debate. We're going to take a bit more time today to really pull apart the machinery behind this, to look at the procedural gears that usually get buried in the fine print.
Right, because what stands out in the record isn't just the lack of a deal, but the specific interplay between the SAVE Act and the funding for those TSA agents who are currently working for IOUs. It's a disagreement over the very definition of what qualifies as an essential service.
We'll also look at the cracks forming in the support for the administration's war request, including some pointed questions from Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, about where that $200 billion is actually headed. The transcript shows some unexpected alliances forming on the fiscal side of that argument.
And we have a technical debate about data privacy and the ongoing DOJ audits that might actually have more impact on the average tax return than anything else we discussed today. It's a dense Wednesday record, but there are threads here that connect the airport lines to the global stage.
It starts with the standoff that's currently paralyzing the nation's infrastructure. Let's look at the 40-day fracture. Let's talk about the excursion. That is the specific word the administration is currently using to describe the military operation in Iran, but the reality on the ground, and in the budget, is starting to look like something far more permanent. Yesterday, Wednesday, on the Senate floor, Peter Welch, Democrat from Vermont, stood up and essentially asked, since when does an excursion carry a $200 billion price tag?
It is a massive figure to wrap your head around, especially when you consider that we have a little more room to really follow the money today. If you look at the transcript, Senator Welch points out that this supplemental request is $60 billion higher than what President George W. Bush requested for the initial invasion of Iraq back in 2003. That detour into historical comparison is important because it shows the scale we are dealing with right out of the gate. We aren't building up over years here. The administration is asking for a mountain of capital, while the conflict is only a few weeks old.
And Welch was very specific about where that money is going, or at least who it's following. He noted that 3,000 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne, those are elite paratroopers trained specifically to jump into enemy territory, are currently on their way. They're joining 5,000 Marines being deployed from Japan and California. His argument is that you don't mobilize the 82nd Airborne for a brief excursion. You send them when you're preparing for a significant, long-term presence.
The strategic gap here is what's really striking. On February 28th, the U.S. launched more than 8,000 strikes. The administration's line was that they had successfully decapitated the Iranian leadership, including the Ayatollah. But Reid, as Welch pointed out, the intelligence community is saying the regime itself is still intact. They've already replaced the leaders they lost, so we have this display of overwhelming military force that hasn't actually changed the political reality in Tehran.
Which leads to what Welch calls the vote. He said that in any conflict, the other side gets a vote, and Iran's vote was to close the Strait of Hormuz. For listeners who might not have a map in front of them, this is a narrow waterway, only about 21 miles wide at its tightest point, that connects the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world. 1/3 of the world's liquefied natural gas and about 25% of the global oil supply has to pass through that needle.
And that is where the sleepwalking metaphor Welch used really bites. He argued the administration didn't seem to have a viable strategy for what happens when that artery is squeezed. Iran doesn't need a high-tech navy to keep it closed. They just need to make it too dangerous for commercial shipping. If one mine hits a tanker or one drone strike happens near a vessel, the insurance companies and the shippers simply stop. They won't risk the cargo. And right now, there are hundreds of oil-carrying vessels just sitting on either side of the strait, refusing to move.
The economic fallout of that vote is hitting American households incredibly fast. Representative Chris Pappas, Democrat from New Hampshire, spoke on the House floor yesterday about the unsustainable burden his constituents are feeling. He noted that gas prices have jumped 35% in less than 30 days. We're looking at a national average of $3.98 a gallon, which is a massive shock to the system in such a short window.
Pappas is actually moving a piece of legislation called the Gas Prices Relief Act of 2026. He's working with Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat from Arizona, to try and suspend the federal gas tax through September. It's about 18 cents a gallon. Now, you could argue that 18 cents doesn't solve a 35% price spike, but Pappas is framing it as an immediate bridge for families who are already dealing with high grocery costs and rising insurance premiums.
The bill has an interesting accountability hook, too. It includes provisions to hold oil and gas companies liable if they don't pass those savings directly to the person at the pump. Pappas is clearly trying to prevent a situation where the government cuts the tax but the price stays high, because the companies just pocket the difference. He's worried that every school drop-off or trip to the doctor is becoming a financial crisis for families in New Hampshire.
But the pain isn't just at the gas pump. Marcy Kaptur, Democrat from Ohio, brought up a side of this that often gets overlooked in these foreign policy debates: the heartland. She's looking at the record diesel prices, $5.37 a gallon. For an Ohio farmer about to start spring planting, that isn't just a high cost, it's a threat to the entire year's viability.
She connected the Strait of Hormuz directly to the American farm in a way that was really compelling. It isn't just the oil. She pointed out that 1/3 of the global fertilizer supply also moves through that strait. Fertilizer and diesel are both traded on global markets. So when a drone strike happens off the coast of Iran, the price of fertilizer in Northwest Ohio goes up instantly, right as the planting season begins. She called it a reckoning for the heartland.
Kaptur was blunt. She asked, "Is the White House, hello, are you paying attention?" There is this growing sense of frustration among these members that the administration is focused on the tactical win of hitting 8,000 targets, but they aren't looking at the systemic collapse of the agricultural economy that follows when these global supply lines are severed.
That frustration boiled over with Representative Lloyd Doggett, Democrat from Texas. He gave a very sharp critique of what he called a reckless war. He pointed out that the administration ignored warnings from its own advisors, who predicted exactly this outcome: the closure of the strait, the intact regime, and the rising costs. He used a particularly vivid phrase, saying Iran has grabbed Trump by the Hormuz, and warned that we are entering a quagmire that could mirror the Iraq War.
Doggett's focus on the fiscal trade-off was where he really dug in. He took that $200 billion request and started listing the domestic programs that could be funded with that same money. He argued that instead of this military excursion, that money could provide affordable health care for 22 million Americans for 7 years, or fully fund VA health care for 9 million veterans for 2 years. He even mentioned doubling the budget for the National Institutes of Health to research diseases like Alzheimer's.
It's a powerful way to frame the debate. He's essentially asking the public to choose between a conflict with no clear exit strategy and these massive domestic priorities. He also highlighted the human cost, mentioning that over 200 American service members have already been wounded in these first few weeks. He's worried that without a formal debate or a war powers authorization, Congress is just rubber stamping a disaster.
Senator Welch echoed that sentiment regarding the responsibility of the legislature. He read a very poignant quote into the record about the true burden of war. He said, "The burden of war is borne by those who fight it, the young men and the young women who put themselves in harm's way because we sent them there. They're the ones who suffer the loss of life, devastation in their families, lifelong injuries, PTSD. But the true burden of war is borne by those who fight, not by those who decide."
Welch is coming from a state Vermont, that has seen some of the highest per capita casualty rates in recent history. So that quote carries a lot of weight for his constituents. He's making the case that a democracy cannot wage war effectively without public backing and strategic clarity, neither of which he sees in this current Iran policy. He's already declared he will vote against the $200 billion appropriation.
It's a standoff that's only going to get more intense as that funding bill moves through. You have the administration claiming the military job is done because they destroyed the launchers, but you have the economic reality of $5 diesel and nearly $4 gas telling a very different story to the American public. The excursion is quickly becoming the central fiscal and constitutional crisis of the spring.
And as that debate over the cost of war continues to simmer, another battle is intensifying in the House over the rules of American democracy itself. It's a move toward a new set of requirements for the 2026 elections.
Right. Up next, we're looking at the SAVE Act Battlefront.
While most of the oxygen in the Capitol yesterday, Wednesday, was taken up by the multi-billion-dollar price tags of Operation Epic Fury and the standoff over the Save America Act, the Congressional Record began to fill with a different kind of data. These are the entries that usually happen during the morning hour or in the quiet moments before adjournment, the formal tributes to the first casualties of this new conflict in the Middle East.
It's a stark shift in tone. For weeks, the floor has been a place of high-level strategy and budget disputes. But yesterday, Wednesday, the names of individual service members started appearing in the proceedings. It's where the geopolitical map of Operation Epic Fury meets the kitchen tables of places like White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and Wilmington, Ohio. You start to see the disconnect between the official messaging of surgical strikes and the reality of the incoming fire these units are actually facing.
Exactly. One of the most significant moments occurred in the Senate, where John Thune, a Republican from South Dakota, acting on behalf of Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat from Minnesota, moved to discharge the Armed Services Committee from further consideration of Senate Resolution 648. This wasn't just a procedural formality. It was an amendment to ensure the record accurately reflected the scale of a single event at Port Shuaiba in Kuwait on March 1st.
Port Shuaiba is an interesting detail because Kuwait is often framed in these debates as a stable logistics hub, a safe distance from the primary kinetic zones in Iraq or Syria. But this resolution details a lethal unmanned aircraft system attack, a drone strike, that hit the 103rd Sustainment Command.
The amendment specifically lists the 6 individuals killed in that March 1 attack. The record now reads, whereas on March 1, 2026, an unmanned aircraft system attack on Port Shuaiba killed Master Sergeant Nicole M. Amor, age 39, of White Bear Lake, Minnesota, Captain Cody A. Cork, 35, of Winter Haven, Florida, Sergeant First Class Noah L. Teachins, 42, of Bellevue, Nebraska, Sergeant Declan J. Cody, 20, of Des Moines, Iowa, Major Jeffrey R. O'Brien, 45, of Waukee, Iowa, and Chief Warrant Officer 3, Robert M. Marzan, 54, of Spotsylvania, Virginia.
Look at the age range in that list. You have Declan Cody, who was 20 years old, alongside Robert Marzan, who was 54. That spans 3 decades of military experience in one unit, wiped out by a single drone. Senator Klobuchar's resolution goes into quite a bit of detail about Master Sergeant Amor specifically. She had nearly 20 years in the Army Reserve, including previous tours in Kuwait and Iraq back in 2019. She was a spouse and a mother. These details are being read into the record at the same time the administration is describing the operation as having minimal risk to American personnel.
And it wasn't just the Senate. Over in the House, we saw a similar moment from Representative Jeff Crank, a Republican from Colorado. He took 5 minutes to speak about Sergeant Benjamin N. Pennington, who was killed on March 8th at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Representative Crank actually brought a visual aid to the floor, a drawing Pennington had made in kindergarten.
That's a heavy detail for a floor speech. What did the drawing say?
It was a sketch of a soldier, and he wrote, "I love America because I want to fight for my country." He was 5 years old when he drew that. He grew up to become an Eagle Scout, joined the Army at 18, and was serving as a supply unit specialist. Representative Crank noted that Pennington had recently been baptized in Colorado Springs this past January, just before deploying for Operation Epic Fury.
Prince Sultan Air Base is another secure location that is clearly seeing more action than the briefings suggest. Pennington was only 26. Representative Crank used a very specific phrase in his tribute. He called the sacrifice a grave and sobering reminder of the dangers our men and women in uniform face in the Middle East and across the globe. It's a subtle pushback against the idea that this conflict is being managed entirely through remote technology and high-altitude bombing.
There's a clear pattern here of members of Congress trying to ground the policy debate in these personal histories. Later in the day, Representative Orlando Taylor, a Republican from Ohio, rose to honor Captain Curtis Angst. This connects back to that March 12th crash we mentioned briefly in a previous episode, where a KC-135 aerial refueling tanker went down in Iraqi airspace.
Right. A tanker crash often points to either mechanical failure under high operational tempo or potential interference. Those KC-135s are the workhorses of any extended air campaign. Without them, the fighters can't stay on station. What did we learn about Captain Angst from the record?
He was a pilot with the 166th Air Refueling Squadron. He was 30 years old, an aerospace engineering grad from the University of Cincinnati. His father was a private pilot, his mother was a flight attendant. Aviation was essentially the family business. Representative Taylor mentioned that Angst had 880 flight hours and 67 combat hours. He was killed alongside 5 other crew members on that mission.
Taylor's quote on this really sticks out. He told the House, "This tragedy is a solemn reminder that freedom is not free, and that we owe a debt of gratitude to Curtis and the other service members who have given their lives in service to this country." When you hear that after a month of debates about whether the U.S. should be spending another $200 billion on this operation, the rhetoric about defending the rules-based order starts to feel very secondary to the loss of a 30-year-old pilot from Wilmington.
It's also worth noting how these tributes are bipartisan. You had Thune and Klobuchar working together in the Senate on the Port Schweba resolution. In the House, these are often 1-minute or 5-minute speeches where the chamber is mostly empty, but the words are recorded forever. It creates this secondary narrative in the Congressional Record, one that isn't about partisan point scoring, but about the actual human footprint of the decisions made in that building.
Wait, did Taylor or Crank mention anything about the cause of the KC-135 crash or the attack in Saudi Arabia beyond the general enemy attack phrasing? The administration has been very tight-lipped about the specific capabilities the opposition is using.
They didn't go into the classified specifics, but Representative Crank's mention of an enemy attack at Prince Sultan Air Base is significant. That base is deep within Saudi Arabia. For a supply specialist to be killed there suggests a breach of the perimeter or a very sophisticated long-range strike. The record doesn't explain the how, but by naming the fallen, it forces the why back into the conversation.
It's a reality check. While the House is arguing over the procedural hurdles of the SAVE America Act, the casualty list for Operation Epic Fury is growing across 3 different countries: Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. The record from yesterday, Wednesday, essentially serves as a memorial wall being built in real time, one entry at a time.
And as the conflict scales up, these tributes are likely to become more frequent. But for now, they stand as the only part of the record where the 2 parties seem to be in complete agreement, honoring the names of people like Master Sergeant Amor and Captain Angst.
While the focus remains on the casualties overseas, there's another kind of map being redrawn back home, one that's sparking a very different kind of fight in the House Oversight Committee.
Which brings us to the latest development in the push for federalizing the Capitol and the ongoing battle over the maps. Looking at the record from yesterday, Wednesday, it's clear the legislative gears are grinding toward a very specific cliff. But before we step away from the transcript, there's one final maneuver from the executive branch that demands a closer look.
Right. It's a bit of a legal Hail Mary, isn't it? a way to keep the engine running even after the mechanics, in this case, the High Court, decided the car wasn't technically street legal anymore.
Exactly. In a final act of executive defiance, President Trump today extended the national emergency on trade deficits. The reason is pretty transparent when you look at the timeline. It's the only way he can keep his signature tariffs alive after the Supreme Court ruled they were unconstitutional just last month.
It's a fascinating pivot. The court says no, but the emergency declaration essentially says, watch me. By framing the trade deficit as a national security crisis, the administration found a loophole to bypass that judicial roadblock and keep those port fees exactly where they are for the time being.
The administrative chess match continues. That's Floor Notes Extended for today.
Thanks for spending part of your day with us. We'll be back in your feed the next time the gavel drops.